Hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here. I want to introduce this awesome panel to you. But before I introduce them, I want to thank Lee for organizing this. And I also want to thank Miss Cleo. She's been instrumental in making, sure this kind of dialogue happens here at Lee. And I want to tell a little story that I hope inspires you. So when we started to organize this, we thought of a title for the panel. And the title was Representation of Blacks in media, school, and sports. And then Angela brought to us, after we had started publicizing, Susie had kindly agreed to make the flyers, and she did make the flyers, and we had announced everything. Angela brought to us the idea that calling minority groups, especially minority groups, this way was dehumanizing, right? And we've learned, we checked on that, and we've learned from this experience. So we changed, you might not have noticed that we changed the name, to Black representation, right? So why do I want to say this? I want to say this to say that we all make mistakes. We all make mistakes. We are learning together on this. But the key is to not be defensive and to believe what you're being told, right? So you believe that this is not the way to do it, right? And so you change it, and that's it. And then we are, we've learned. So that's, I hope, if we're telling you this story, that we are trying to model behavior, in many ways. So, okay, having said that, and this little piece that we've learned, I'm super happy to introduce Briana Berner. Briana is a native of the south side of Chicago who made her way to Texas from North Carolina, where she attended Bennett College, a historically Black liberal arts college for women. She graduated with a dual degree in journalism and media studies and Africana women's studies. Briana is also a graduate at the Center for Women's and Gender Studies at the University of Texas at Austin, where she wrote her master's thesis on the powerful Black Girl Magic hashtag. She continues to serve as facilitator for Inspire, a women's leadership program for undergraduates in the Center for Women's and Gender Studies. She's currently also a PhD candidate in the Radio, Television, Film Department at UT. And her research interests include digital and Black feminism, social media as a tool for social justice and activism, podcasts hosted by people who hold marginalized identities, and the representation of Black girls and women in popular culture and media. In the flyers that we distributed, there was a link where you could see her work in the university's Flow Journal, most recently about a controversial online ad for a popular ethnic hair care line. So that's, on Facebook, we promoted that, and there's the link is right there. So thank you so much for being here. Lorena Germán, am I saying Germán, thank you, is an immigrant from the Dominican Republic and raised in the U.S. She attended public schooling from first grade to high school. She earned her bachelor's degree in English communication from Emmanuel College and her master's of arts in English from Middlebury College's Bread Loaf School of English. Lorena is an advocate for the practice of a culturally sustaining pedagogical approach in education. She has been in the field of education, working in various settings since 2001. Her extensive experience in many settings, ranging from extracurricular youth work to community spaces to the traditional classroom, equips her to offer sound advice as to strong teaching practices. Lorena has held educational leadership positions at the department level, school-wide level, and in the larger district level, from designing curriculum to strategizing for improvement. She is the incoming chair of the National Council of English Teachers Committee Against Racism and Bias in the Teaching of English, and she's also co-founder of Disrupt Texas. Currently, she teaches at Headwaters School in Austin. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And Javier Wallace, he's pursuing a PhD in physical education, teacher education, where he researches issues surrounding race, class, gender, labor migration, nationality, and transnationalism of athletes from the US, Latin America, and the Caribbean. He earned his bachelor's and master's degrees from Florida A&M University, where he also played offensive lineman for the regular football team. Javier is of US and Panamanian heritage and has served as athletic director and physical educator in the Republic of Panama. Javier is an avid world traveler and co-founder of two social entrepreneurial, that's a hard word for me, projects, Afro-Latino Travel and Black Podcast. Thank you so much for being here. So I also want to thank you for accepting this invitation to reflect, but above all, to learn. Thank you.
My computer is a little bit slow, so you'll be able to. Okay, good evening everyone. Again, my name is Briana. I am also a parent, and I think that this is a fantastic space. My son will be in kindergarten in the fall, and I hope that at his incoming school they have something like this. So I think this is awesome. Thank you for having me here. So this talk is actually something that Ashlyn saw me do a couple of months ago, well, last year, and and asked me to come and speak to you all about it. So I look forward to sharing it with you. So as you all can see, this is the title. So I'll be talking about Black podcasts. So this is like a very small portion of my larger work, which will be looking at Black podcasts in non-republics, and I can talk about that more.
We started very well.
Yes, right. Let's
Yeah, if not, I can also just.
Yeah, I don't need to be all fancy, but
Yeah, let's go the normal way.
Okay, so I'll just give you a brief background of podcasts and about my interest in them. So podcasts have been around for a decade. Do any of you listen to podcasts? Oh, yay! Sometimes when I do this, people have no idea what I'm talking about. So I'm excited that y'all know about podcasts. So it's not a new medium. It's been around for a very long time, but it just now started like becoming popular within the last, I'd say, 6 or 7 years, I guess. And this is largely due to the fact that smartphones have become more advanced. And so before you had to like download them and listen offline, and now you can just like go on your phone and like if you have an iPhone, it's right there. I don't have an Android, so I don't know like how you listen to Android, but I'm sure it's like a similar process. But it makes it easier because you don't have to like listen to it in a stationary position. You can listen to it on the go, when you're in your car, when you're in the gym, etc. So it makes it a lot more accessible and easier to listen to. And so again, it can be listened to wherever. There's apps that help to move that forward. So in 2015, so about 2 years after like the podcast boom. So the podcast boom is says I've started like with Serial. Did any of you listen to Serial? Okay. So Serial debuted in like 2013, 2014, and set off like a whole explosion of more podcasts coming to life. And so around this time, a scholar named Chinjirai Kumanika recorded a piece for Transom, and it was separate from Serial, but he kind of just like pondered about what it meant to talk in a voice that was not his own. So he would hear himself speaking, and he's like, I'm not using a voice that I'm familiar with. I'm kind of like putting on a voice that I believe sounds like what the public radio figure sounds like, but this isn't my actual voice. So in his piece, he reflected on what that meant for him, what it meant to speak in a voice that he didn't recognize as his own. So from that article, a whole kind of like panic happened where people were like, oh my goodness, is there like a public radio voice, and is that voice white? And I'm pretty sure you all can guess that most people said yes, it is a white voice. And the panic that ensued from that, which is really interesting because it seemed like this was like a new revelation for people. But for him and for other marginalized people where they have to think about how they sound and the different politics that surround voice and language, this is something that we have to think about pretty often. So in terms of what I'm interested in thinking through, I'm interested in thinking through like why this panic happened or why it was like such a surprise. And also I'm interested in the Black podcasts that I listen to that challenge like the public radio voice or the NPR voice, and I'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so the NPR voice, I'm sure that you all are very familiar with it, and I have this few quotes from people, and this was, like I said, around the time when all of this happened, so I'll just summarize some of them. So it has looser language, it has a lot of pauses and a lot of like slow downs and very calm, and the sentences are pauses at the ends and things like that, lots of reflections. And again, if you listen to public radio, you know the voice. So even if you don't like listen to it all the time, you know what the voice sounds like. But I think that one of the things that's interesting in me is that we know what the voice sounds like, but we don't really talk about it. It's kind of just like assumed that like this is the standard voice, even though a lot of people don't, most people don't speak in that voice. And this Nina Lab article calls it out that it's whispery and it's white. And most other articles that came out around this time just kind of said, oh, it's a general voice, it's blah, blah, blah. But this article is like, no, it's a white voice. And Transom in this article, one of the commenters said it's a flat mid-Atlantic accent. So one of the other things that I've learned in research is that for different groups within public radio, the voice is supposed to like not really show where you're from. So you usually don't hear accent. So this person said mid-Atlantic, but in most cases you can't really tell where the hosts are from. It's supposed to just be like a general accent. And then this other last person talked about like when he was a journalist and growing up and things like that. His particular Midwest accent was not acceptable at all. So that was something that he dealt with and that it wasn't an ideal American voice. So I'm going to play a quick clip from Ira Glass so that you all can further hear what the NPR voice sounds like.
Maybe you saw this story about a month ago. This couple was sailing across the Pacific Ocean on a boat with 2 young daughters, and one of the kids was 3, and the other was just a baby, like a year old. And the baby got sick, and they called in rescuers. 4 Air National Guardsmen parachuted in. A Navy vessel traveled 2,000 miles to reach them. And this got a lot of play, can I say kind of weirdly, in newspapers, online, on morning TV.
Emergency medics parachuting in to save a sick baby on board a sailboat adrift at sea. ABC's Martha Raddatz here with that story. And Martha, so many questions about what that family was doing out there in the first place.
So many questions this morning, George. This rescue...
Good morning, America. George Stephanopoulos and Martha Raddatz updated viewers on the rescue, but also raised the question that seemed to animate a lot of the interest in the story. That question, were these bad parents?
Their trip immediately sparking criticism on the family's Facebook page. One person calling them irresponsible parents. Another writing, how selfish to jeopardize the lives of their tiny and helpless children.
So I'll stop it there. So again, you kind of heard like some of the things that the different authors talked about. There's lots of pauses. There's also like a very like type format too. And the podcasts that I study do not have those same kind of formats, and we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so whiteness and podcasts in audio in general. So one of the things that I'm interested in thinking about is how whiteness is marked and unmarked. So it's marked in the sense that, again, like the public radio voice is something that was considered a white voice, but it was unmarked in the sense that no one wanted to admit that it was a white voice, and when it was called out, like, there was like the shock and like, how dare you say that it's a white voice, even though we all know that that's what it stands for. And so in podcast research, the assumed listener for podcasts are older, affluent white males. This is not true, and that it's not like representative of podcast listeners, but in terms of podcast research, Edison Research does a survey every year, and they don't ask for the race of the consumers that they're interviewing. So they ask for their age, their gender, their class, etc., but they don't ask for their race. And so in not asking for their race, they are assuming that the listeners are white. So it doesn't reflect like the actual demographic of listeners. And so that's something I'm interested in as well. And so again, like the shock that that happened from the scholar saying that, like, is there a white public radio voice is indicative of the fact that whiteness is marked and unmarked. And so in terms of like public radio, you're supposed to be objective, etc. And the podcasts that I listen to do not have that same objectiveness, but this is like a standard within radio, but in journalism as well. And I'll explore how the podcasts I listen to don't adhere to that. So these are some of my research questions. And these are for this project, but it centers like my larger work. So I'm interested in thinking about, again, how is whiteness marked and unmarked within podcasts? And this is both for quote unquote white podcasts and non-white podcasts. And how do Black podcasts move from the margins? So how do Black podcasts separate themselves from that standard format of NPR style podcasts, and how do they differentiate themselves from that, create their own sound and their own unique tone? And how also is race produced within the podcast space? So how does race sound? Like, what is a black podcast? That's one of like the central questions for my work. I don't know the answer yet, but I'm going to explore that more. How is Blackness positioned within podcasts? So when you're listening to a Black podcast, what do the hosts do to let you know that this is a Black podcast? And also that it's for a Black audience or whoever they intend for their audience to be. And then lastly, how is difference marked within podcasts in general? So one of my dissertation committee members writes about Black podcasts, so it's been interesting learning from her. And so she has written about a certain group of podcasts, but I think that the elements that she identifies within these podcasts can be expanded to other podcasts as well. So they do not have the same format as the NPR style podcast. They don't follow like a very tight format. They're more conversational. It sounds like conversations between friends that you're listening in on. It's very casual. And the Blackness is like very centered within those podcasts. So they might actually say, I am Black within the podcast, or just like talk about Black issues or center Black things in general to let you know that this podcast centers Black people and is for Black audiences. And one of the other interesting things is that they aren't concerned with the white gaze, so they're not concerned about whether or not white people listen or whether white people think about the podcast. They do have white listeners, but they let them know from the beginning, this podcast is not for you. So if you're listening to it, understand that you are not centered within this podcast. And again, they intentionally sound different. So they do not sound like very tightly polished. They sound very conversational, and you'll hear a clip of what I mean by that. Okay, so I will play a clip from The Read, which is one of the podcasts I studied. And Ashley, I know the lead coach will be here first.
Oh, okay. He's okay.
Cover your ears, Nico.
Speaking of Blue Ivy, she absolutely was at the Rumble Art Gala where she was not letting anybody, including Tyler Perry, outbid her for anything. I love it. I don't know, I think it was like a Basquiat. No, it was a portrait of Sidney Poitier. And Tyler Perry told some story about how he just saw this piece of art and was like, oh my goodness, I have to have it. I'm so rich, nobody is gonna outbid me. Until little Blue Ivy in her gold wig turned and said, oh, Medea. Today is the day.
So I mainly wanted you all to also hear one of the hosts laugh. So again, like Crystal's laugh. Crystal's one of the hosts. She laughs throughout the show. They laugh together. Sounds very different from This American Life. And it's very intentional that it sounds different like that. There is vulgar language within it. They talk about pop culture. They talk about issues of race. They talk about all kinds of different things. And they have a format, but it's very different from the way that the formats are for NPR. So I just wanted you all to hear the difference in how the two sounded. So again, one of the things that's important within my research is thinking about how marginalized groups move away from being marginalized and like censor themselves within their work. And so the last place they thought of is a quote from a book called Demonic Grounds by Catherine McKittrick, and she studies Black feminist geography. And she writes about the different ways that Black women navigate through different spaces where they aren't meant to be or where they are marginalized, and how they move within those spaces and navigate to center themselves instead of being on the margins or like outside of mainstream. So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about with this work and some of the questions that I'll be grappling with my dissertation. So this is just a conclusion of future research. So again, this will be my dissertation. I have not started it yet, so I have a long way to go. But my larger work looks at Black podcasts as countercultures. And so I'm interested just in thinking about how Black podcasts differentiate themselves from mainstream NPR style podcasts. So I hope that you all have enjoyed my show. Oh, is it? I was just gonna show you all really quickly if you had any further questions. I have my email address, and I can answer whatever questions y'all have. But here's my contact information. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening. Did I teach class today? Today is Wednesday. I TA'd a class today, but I didn't teach a class today. I teach a class tomorrow, Thursday, and I teach on Tuesday. So I thought I was presented, but now I feel like I'm back in the classroom. It's okay. It's okay, because I like being in the classroom. I really do. I like being on the field. I like being in the arena of education. I think it's super, super important, because if we don't find a way to educate ourselves, we remain in the same place that we are now. And I would really like to thank Dr. Martinez, not only for the invitation to be here, but for her candidness at the beginning of the panel when thinking about how naming things affect people, or giving marginalized voices the platform to be able to speak and be heard and understood in the way that it's intended to be. I think that's super important. And I think these are the spaces that we have to be able to have and facilitate for different understanding to happen. Because I'll ask you a question: when did you learn about race? And you can answer it. This is just a story. When did you learn about race? Who taught you about it? Kindergarten?
Playground?
Playground?
Yeah.
So, I got that much time.
I didn't learn about race until I was an adult.
Right?
Yeah.
So, that's a good point. Sometimes we don't think about race, we don't learn about race maybe until it's like a formal setting. But the informal setting on those playgrounds, and you're talking about elementary, right? So then, kids do understand things about difference. They do understand that that person doesn't look like me, or that person doesn't have what I have, right? Kids understand these things. So the question I always have, if we know that we learn differences, and this is a space of education, so why don't we talk about race? Why don't we teach it? The answer is because many of us have never learned about it, and many of us don't know how to talk about it. If I ask you, what is white culture? If I ask you, what is black culture? What are some things with blackness? I'm pretty sure you're able to say more things that you associate with blackness than whiteness. Because oftentimes when I work at University of Texas, a lot of white students will say, we don't have culture. White people don't have culture. I say, well, you say that not me. But the point is, we all have culture. Now what happens is whiteness is so, it's the dominant, it's so normalized that we don't know what it is. People that don't operate, that are not white, understand how it works and what white culture is, but because it's so prevalent and it's so normative and it's so hegemonic, that's a big academic word, because it's hegemonic, a lot of white people we don't have culture. It's just, we operate, it's always operationalized. So I think, for me, why I'm here is because I always have to ask myself my reason why. that's the reason why I'm here. That's the reason why I'm at the University of Texas, Austin, doing a PhD. Because I'm from Austin, Texas, born and raised. Unicorn, born and raised in Austin, Texas. My mom is from Austin, Texas. 3012 East 12th Street to be exact. My dad is from Panama. My grandparents were right outside Austin, Lockhart, outside of Lockhart, St. John's Colony in Litton Springs, Texas. They came here in the 40s when they left the farm. They left pig cotton and came to Austin. My grandfather was a janitor at the University of Texas at Austin, born in 1922. And he always wanted his children to go to the University of Texas at Austin. That was his dream. Why? Because he could never go there. He was born in 1922. The University of Texas doesn't start anywhere until late 50s. He's already in his 30s having a whole bunch of kids by this point in time. College is not a dream. It's not a possibility. But then I fast forward to now. I always say, would you look at this? Somebody whose grandfather, who I knew for a very long time, who was only good enough to sweep the halls of these lecture rooms. Now his grandson has the opportunity to receive the highest degree and stand in front of these places and teach. And the only thing, the only thing that he wasn't able to change, that I can't change, still, was the color of his skin. That's the only thing that kept him out of that institution. The only thing that kept him out. And I take pride in that, because I think it helps me think about why, my reason why being here. So now talking about representation, I'm a former student athlete. My dad came here from Panama to play tennis. He met my mom at a tennis program in East Austin geared for black children participating in tennis. So I'm the product of a tennis ball. Reality, racism in tennis. That's my reality here in the United States. So that's me. But I have a couple other questions to you thinking about this. How do we think about race and why sport is so important? What do you think about these things? Because if we don't learn about race in too many formal settings, if we have opportunity when we're adults, and we know these informal settings that we learn about race, whether on the school, on the playground, maybe the media presents us a great opportunity to learn about race, right? So, in sport is a very good domain to look at, especially now, currently, right? Because if I ask you a question, like, what's the first thing that pops in your head when I say black male athlete? First word.
Colin Kaepernick.
Colin Kaepernick, first word. Football. Another adjective. First adjective that pops in your head when we say black male athlete.
Strong.
Strong. Another one.
Fast.
Fast. Now, if I change it, I say white male athlete, what's the first adjective that comes to your head?
What?
Larry Bird. Can't jump. Right? You're being honest. You're being honest. Right? You're being honest. That's good. So I just want to share with you, because we did this in our class in the University of Texas, the history of African Americans in sport, where we have about 150 undergraduates, primarily freshmen, in the fall semester that come in, and we send them out on campus, and we poll them. We get them to talk to their students on campus and ask them that same question, and they poll it down. So I'm going to show you the results of what University of Texas students think when they hear black athlete, black female athlete, white male athlete, white female athlete. So see, these are some of the things that they think about when they hear black athlete, black male athlete, strong, tall, and this is a word cloud. So the biggest words are the ones that appear the most. Those are the results that students provided the most. Football, like we heard in here, strong, we heard in here, fast, we heard in here, big, quick, athletic, muscular, talented, thank you, I used to be, and I'm still now. But then if we go to white male athlete, still some of the same things, football, strong,
Talented.
slow. Laughing because y'all think that.
Talented too.
Talented.
Yeah, I imagine that.
Smart, golf, rich, right? Average, right? Quarterback, we hear that. Intelligent, so some of those things. Now we go think about gender again. Now going to black female athletes. What are some of the things you think about black female athletes? Black female athletes. Powerful, tall, basketball, strong, persistent.
Yeah.
Well, let's see what UT has.
Resilient.
Right
Serena
now.
Williams.
Yes, Serena Williams.
This grade scale. Tennis is mainly because of Williams sisters. And we know, well, I'm not going to go there today, but tennis is strong, fast, athletic, aggressive, loud. And I think that goes super well with the previous presentation. You know, these are some stereotypes that people ascribe to blacks, right? Loud, stupid, trash. And these are what students are saying around campus. Aggressive, masculine. So then, white female athletes. Poised.
Smart.
Cute.
Maybe.
Okay. Smart. Lean. Well, let's see what UT got to say. Volleyball. Soccer, tennis. Small, skinny, weak. Right? Strong, short, nothing. Right? Privileged.
Rich.
Gymnastics, athletic, blah, blah, blah. A lot of things, right? And there's some big differences between these groups. And if we don't learn about race formally, and there's a lot of these informal settings that we learn about race, and these are the results that we're getting, so what's going on? Where are we getting these things from? And what are the implications to these populations when we think about these people in certain ways? Because even if you notice, descriptions of black athletes are few. Even when you think about the amount of adjectives that people use to describe white athletes is different. Same thing here. Black female athletes, very few. And it's rich detail when we talk about white athletes. Rich detail. Descriptive details. You know, and it's all type of little things in there. All type, blonde, slim, average, less. So this is not even, we don't even think about blackness in the same way. And a lot of these messages come through what we see on TV. A lot of that stuff. And did you know? I'm gonna the picture. Oh, the picture, whatever. It ain't there. Well, Jack Johnson. Anybody familiar with Jack Johnson? Boxer, right from Galveston, Texas, the first black heavyweight champion of the world. He wins December 26th in 1908 in Australia against Tommy Burns. Before this event happens, black people are imagined to be physically inferior, intellectually inferior than white people. That is the idea, and that's what science is telling us too. Pseudoscience at this point. Pseudoscience is telling us that black people are inferior on all levels. But then when Jack Johnson beats Tommy Burns, this narrative starts to change. That where are these black people coming from? And they're strong. They're big. Anybody ever heard the Great White Hope? Anybody ever heard that terminology? The Great White Hope? You know what that comes from?
Hoping that a white guy was going to win a boxing match after mostly black athletes were winning all the
No, it was this Jack Johnson. It was after he beat Tommy Burns and the world didn't know what to do, they were looking for a great white hope to be able to get whiteness back, to get superiority back. And then when he finally fought Mr. Jeffries in 1910, he beat him down. And the great white hope was taken out. So then these pervasive stereotypes start coming out about blackness. Now black athletes, he's the first real black athlete. And now we start thinking about black athletes now being physically superior, bigger, faster, stronger, more muscles, right? Jump high because their torsos are smaller, right? Because they have long limbs. They have extra Achilles muscles, right? We've heard some of this stuff. I'm not making it up. And a lot of this is science. It was science, so it's pseudoscience, by the way, about blackness. And it's super important for us to understand these things because that's not who we are. In reality being told, black athletes are the minorities in sports. Only in high revenue generating sports is the majority of athletes are they black. The NFL, the NBA, the WNBA, sprints and track and field, right? Major League Baseball has had, I'd say, an ethnicity shift, not a racial shift, an ethnicity shift from African American to Afro-Latino. I don't say racial, I say an ethnicity shift, but in certain sports. But the club sports, tennis, lacrosse, all the club sports, the country club sports, are still predominantly dominated by white males. White males and white females too, especially like, what do you call that? Rowing. So, I'm almost done. And I think, and I wanted to thinking about, talking about gender more and thinking about where the black female athlete stands. I think the black female athlete holds a very particular place within not even sports, but the U.S. American society. And I think if you can't see that through how these two young ladies have, one, dominated the sport of tennis, but also have been the butt of all most negativity within the sport, we're missing the larger picture. Venus and Serena, they changed the game because they were everything tennis was supposed. They were everything that they were is what tennis was not supposed to be. They were black. They were from Compton, California. They had bees in their hair. So they weren't conforming. Their father was super present, and he was super involved, and super, like kind of like Lamar Ball. We kind of demonize him for being an involved parent that wants to take control of his kid's future and protect their earnings, very so much like the father of the Williams sister. In this particular, the cat suit, and the fact that we even call it a cat suit, over sexualization. Serena Williams can't even have the complications that she has with her giving birth to children, to a child, and still going out to compete at a very high level, and having to deal with bodily issues and wearing a suit that is helping her get through those complications she's had during childbirth without being banned, and the outfit banned from the tournament. The French Open banned this. After her performance, this outfit was banned. And just so that you know, she's not the first woman to have worn a full body suit in a professional tennis match. But it's something about her physical features that was offensive and made it not appropriate. However, so we talk about a lot of negative things with the black with black athletes, but black athletes have done amazing things for issues surrounding social justice and race for black people. And we know some of these people, Colin Kaepernick, but we do know about the 68 Olympics, right? Well, you might not know about the 68 Olympics. That's homework. Go look at it. The 68 Olympics, right? But the idea is all athletes should just shut up and play. Shut up and dribble. Don't act like these issues affect you because you make millions of dollars. You're LeBron James. Nobody's going to kill you. You make millions of dollars, even though you're black. But the idea is not because of him. It's because of the community. Because at the end of the day, these athletes, including myself, we have to take off our jerseys. And we get old. We have to retire. But we have to return to the communities from which we came. And if our communities don't have the same level of equality or can't even imagine themselves to be, we're doing ourselves a disservice by going out and making all this money and just going back into and assuming our position. So if there's anything that I can share with you today that you can take away as I close, it's not to think about any individual one-dimensional. Any group of people one-dimensional. Don't essentialize people because of their race, because of their gender. Understand that there's a lot of things that pull us together collectively that we share. But I'm an individual as well as you're an individual. I have hopes, dreams, desires the same way you and your children do. So please allow people to be. And if a child wants to play sports, let him or her or how you identify play. But don't push a person because they're black and you go, you on the basketball, you can be on the basketball team, black girl, you jump high. You do that. So understand that we are very complex people. All of us are human beings. Thank you for your time.
Still asking.
No, it's not. Hey, Earl, send it to me.
But I think.
I'm thinking maybe I'll skip my portion and just give us a chance to ask questions and get into conversation.
It's your show, so you decide.
Lorena, I want to hear your portion.
No, we want to hear your portion.
The two of you can. All right, I'll do mine very quickly. It's just about having a conversation around representation in schools, and then I added the home portion because I know that we're all parents, and so how do I then bring this work to my house? So very briefly, I'll start with this research, and really it was more like an essay, if you will, that Rudine Sims Bishop, an African American woman, wrote some years back in the early 90s. And it's funny because it's gaining so much traction now, as if like this is a new concept, but it's been around. And so she talked a lot about, or in that piece she explained this idea of books as sometimes windows. And so what she means by that is that, books can sometimes be used in the life of young people to, kind of look out and observe and see the world. And maybe see something different, but, here is my world. And that sometimes those windows can also be sliding glass doors. And so that idea is that students will then actually walk through into a new world and maybe go into a place that they are, where they're strangers, where they don't know, they're not maybe the dominant group, or maybe they, or it's just a new and different place, so that books can operate that way. And then sometimes how a window, and it's really, she just does a good job with this metaphor. And so she talks about that under perfect lighting, that window can be a mirror. So that is one of the pieces where I think there's so much work to do as educators and in our homes too, and in our schools, and in literature, obviously. But that the window as a mirror becomes this opportunity for young people who are not often represented, and that's always going to be marginalized populations in this country that happen to be people of color. So those books become mirrors so that I can actually see myself, see my people, see my mom or my dad or my brother in this book, so that there is this identification that happens. And so without being idealistic, literature can really help us understand each other and actually change our attitudes toward difference and toward what we have been taught is other, right? To go back to Javier's point around like, when did we learn about race? We do learn about race, and by the time we're in the playground, we have these notions. It's already been kind of inculcated in us through media, through really, it's like a smog, right? Race, issues of race is like a smog. We just kind of breathe it in every day. And so it's gonna be really important for us as parents and as educators to be really intentional about dismantling that and integrating our lives, and literature is one way to do that. And that's why that's kind of my approach. I'm an educator, I teach English, well, I teach young people literacy, but if I say that, people are like, really? It's English, and one of the roles that I'm in now, so I teach at Headwaters, but also I work with the National Council of Teachers of English, as you mentioned, and I'm the chair of our national committee against racism and bias in the teaching of English. So this is just like all of the work that we're doing, right? What does it look like for teachers? What does it look like for people in other content areas? Because why stop here? And then what does it look like for parents at home as they're building libraries? So I'm going to briefly just kind of dip into all of that. And I want to bring your attention to this. So this is some research focused on the diversity in children's books in particular, and it's from 2015, and unfortunately, it hasn't changed much. So this is why this continues to circulate in 2019. So this is building off of Bishop's work with books as, mirrors. And so you start with, American Indians and First Nation peoples. And so the percentage is how many are featured, how many of those main characters are from that people group. And so then you see that 2.4% are Latinos, 3% are Asian, Pacific, I mean like the whole, like, are you from anywhere near Asia? Okay, 3%. And then 7% are African Americans. And so they do a good job in this graphic, right, with the size. There are more books about trucks than there are of anybody who is a person of color. And that's a shame. And so then we get to 73% of these books feature white characters. And of that, a large percentage are also male characters, right? I don't know if you've heard of this young woman who's brilliant, Marley Dias, and she's going around the country and even the world talking about, black girl books, and she's assembled, I don't even know how many at this point. It's over, I know it was 1,000, but I think it's like, anyway. And so she talks about, like, I'm tired of reading books about white boys with dogs. I'm over it.
And trucks.
Like, there's got to be more. And that's kind of been her mission, and she's just started to assemble all these books. Anyway, so this is, a real issue that we can tackle both in our schools and at home. This slide is more about representation at all levels in our schools. So this is something that I just wanted to share as a way to think about how, as parents, you can leverage your power in this community. Okay, so teachers have, power in some ways, and parents definitely have power as well. And so you can ask, who is represented in the physical halls of the school? What are these posters that I'm seeing? Are there, and maybe there are, I don't know. I've never walked the halls of this building. Who's seated at the decision-making table? Okay, so when there's a decision that needs to be made in this campus around curriculum or discipline, who is sitting there? Is it all, whatever? Is it heavily, leaning towards one particular group? Who plays a role in setting curriculum? Whose voices are missing? And that's always just such an easy way, like an easy entry point to these conversations, because sometimes I've learned that white people are, they just don't want to talk about this. And so starting like, who would represent, like that might not work. But maybe, I wonder whose voices are missing at this meeting, right? Like that's sometimes one way to get folks to ask questions and reflect and kind of internalize the work a little bit. And then whose culture is valued and prioritized. That last one is a little bit of a thinger, so maybe you use that at the end if it's been a bad meeting and you're like, well, F this whole thing. Whose culture is valued. So these are some of the questions that you might want to use when talking to even teachers, right? If you're coming into your child's classroom and you're really wanting to help that teacher push that work, because if you don't do it, I promise you that no one else will. And so if you want to come in and do this, these are some of the questions that you can use to kind of nudge them along a little bit. And so, libraries at home, there are resources, and I feel like, kind of like Oprah, being like, you get a resource, you. So I'll leave these here, actually, or I'll pass them out. So I brought this for y'all. So this first one, a list of 95 books that my husband and I worked together to compilate for parents, mainly. For books that all feature characters of color, doing normal, regular people things. They don't focus on people of color writing about ourselves. So, 95 books. This is all for ages 0 to 5. And then this list is same idea, books featuring characters of color. Many of these are by, I think actually all of this list are folks of color. And again, characters living their normal, regular lives, but this is for elementary readers, okay? So this is more like chapter books, kind of, probably like 3rd grade, 4th, 5th-ish, but I don't like levels in books, so if your kid wants to read it, just give it to them, okay? Okay, I'll stop there, that was it. This is me if you want to reach me. But what I do want to say, just to transition us to questions, is that I think the thread, right, that we're talking about is about, or one thing that kind of threads us all together is to consider, for all of us, really, this is intentional work, for all of us to think about the ways that whiteness has been centered in this country, right, in order for white supremacy to work. And we have all played a role in the maintenance of that. Some of us have done it intentionally, others have done it because it's just part of our internalization in order to survive. And so intentionality is required to dismantle that. And so we need to be intentional in our libraries at home, intentional with the teachers in our schools, intentional with the schools that we're at, like this group, like this is intentional, right? So this is necessary work. This is not happening everywhere. Intentional in how we and who we listen to, right? Intentional in the sports that we consume and in the conversations that we have with our kids about all of this. So I'll leave it there on like intentionality, and then open it up for questions and conversation.
Good job.
Yeah. So glad you didn't pass.
I know.
I have a question. I like this idea that you mentioned. I'm exploring it. This essentializing, and I've heard that term a lot, and I don't know if I'm using it or thinking about it accurately. Could you give me some examples of how you see it manifesting in a day-to-day way?
White man can't jump.
Like reducing somebody
to what they do or something about them. All black people are loud.
That's stereotyping in a way.
It's stereotyping, and it's just, it doesn't, it's like it's an essential part of that person. It's inherent. They're born with that. They can't do anything about it. That all black people are just loud. It's just who y'all are. Y'all can't do anything about it. That's just it's in your DNA. That's kind of essentialized in black people. I don't know if that does
No, that helps. I mean, and you said that, and I think you just said that the important part is that no one can be reduced to one characteristic, that everyone, like you said, you're complex, we're all complex, and that it dehumanizes to reduce someone.
100%.
Okay, so I've heard that word a lot, that I just think I might have been.
Don't worry, I just started the PhD program last year. I just started using that too. And it's like big words.
So it seems that everything comes down to normalizing whiteness, right? I mean, being podcasts, being sports with certain shift, and in schools. And so what are the ways for us that we can do? And here we are, majority white people, or like a white person of color when we're Latino, whatever, I do not know exactly.
It's complicated.
So, I mean, it seems that you already gave some examples on the books on how to try. What else? Like, what do you have to do?
So I'll take a stab at this one, okay? First of all, white supremacy took a very long time to be built. It will not be unbuilt in a year or even 6 years, right? And so with that in mind, there's something that we all have to understand, and those of us that have been fighting against this forever, we understand the dynamics of change. It takes time, right? Like, when I think about as a parent, like if my daughter moves so slow in the morning, that's just going to take time for me to teach her to put her shoes on the first time I say it, right? And so in the same way, right, like how to dismantle white supremacy, that's really your question. Like how do we dismantle racism? That is going to take all kinds of prongs in every area of our lives, because it is in every area of this fabric of our society. And so there isn't one thing, right? Like I have learned and I feel called to this work of teaching, and so this is my activism space, right? And so it is so important for for none of us to borrow anybody else's work, right? Like I'm not all of a sudden, because I'm so inspired by this podcast thing, right? Like that's it, y'all. I'm joining her bandwagon. I'm taking this on, right? Like maybe I'm really interested, but you gotta own it because it ain't pretty and it's not comfortable. And people will try to stop you. And so you have to be very convicted about what you're doing, And so I don't have an easy answer. Like you got to figure out what it is for you. What is that area that you are like, you know what? For now, at least, I'm gonna fight in this way for this thing. And you come up with, short-term goals, long-term goals. I mean, this is the life. This is la lucha,
Mm-hmm.
It takes forever.
I'll add to that. I think that what y'all are doing here is like a great example of it, because you're, like you say, you're being intentional about it. And I think it's important too because you're parents and you're going to be imparting this wisdom into your kids. And I think that for a long time, like colorblindness was a thing where it's like, we don't see race, we don't see difference or anything. And I think that that is not going to do it, because I think that that's teaching our children to not see difference. But like you said, like, they do see difference and they do understand it. And so for us to be thinking about it, it helps us because they're going to ask questions. My son's 4, he asks questions already. So I think that what y'all are doing here is really important. And I was looking at like the books that were around here and stuff. I think that that's important. Like the kids are going to be able to see different kinds of books and book sisters and things like that. And so I think that what you all are doing here is a really great start to keep that up and keep doing it. And when your kids have questions, answer them and don't shy away from talking to them about it.
I have a question. So, adding to that, I mean, I don't know if Javier wanted to add to.
No, just be intentional about what it is that you're doing. And just briefly, try your best to understand yourself and understand where you stand in society, and be very reflective on it and honest with yourself about that. I think that's a great place to start. I think ideology, ideas are super important, and how we form our ideas and how we transmit those ideas are very powerful. And understanding that nothing is taken lightly. So when you do make comments that are light in nature about race, you have to let the children listen to those things and they start having those understandings about what that is. I think you just have to challenge yourself to be reflective. And also, when somebody tells you something like we heard at the beginning, force yourself to grapple with that. Don't dismiss it because you don't like it. Grapple with it. And if something about that makes you shift in thinking, maybe that's the progress that you needed to make in that one small thing. But racism is very endemic to the United States and the Americas, where this country is built on race. So in lieu of taking up arms and eradicating whiteness like that, which won't happen, we have to think about these spaces that have created white supremacy. Which are education? Which are the places like the University of Texas where people of color were locked out of, didn't have a chance to create these narratives and create education. So these spaces, education spaces, schools, are where white supremacy is born. It's where it's reproduced in 2019 as it was in 1776. So if we can't challenge our teachers and our administrators to change our curriculums and bring these other voices in and start being intentional about talking with communities of different communities, we'll be at the same place. But you got to be very intentional about it.
Thank you. No, I was just trying to, so my question is, just piggybacking on what Angela asked and your wonderful answers. In school, since this is a school, right? How can we reflect in ways that schools, through teachers, through the administration, what are some, things that can be done, sort of like inspire us, to help in that, move in the right direction? And since this panel is on representation, so that's the first question. The second question is, how important is representation in schools, in your view? In having, so for example, Lorena, you talked about how important representation is in books. Having books, so the kids will look at those books and they will mirror themselves. What about having people that look like them in positions of power in those spaces?
Yeah, I talk about that because I think that just how you phrased it is really important, right? Having folks that reflect what you look like in a position of power is really important, but I actually take it a step further because teachers in our society are positioned as knowledge bearers, right? Like if I'm smart, it's usually because the teacher said I'm smart. Whoever teaches me ideas, those are teachers, right? And so if most of our teachers are predominantly white, and that's actually the field of English, it's like almost 90% white females in particular, then that is who our children are seeing as the people that know everything.
Right.
And so then I show up, right? Immigrant, Latina, Spanish speaking, and it just kind of flips the script for a lot of folks. And I know that my role in those spaces is complicated, it's layered, it's necessary too. And it's actually necessary in different spaces. And that's the case for these folks too in their PhD programs at UT. So that when these guys or whomever is taking this survey and saying that black male athletes, like these are the words that come to mind, well, you know, like, but you also now know Javier Wallace, right? Who isn't necessarily those things, and has gone beyond that. And you can see the complexity of groups of people. And so for young people at this school, at any school, this is a national problem, okay? So that's another thing, is to keep it in perspective. Like the issues that you're experiencing at Lee, whatever they are, I am sure they are exactly the same everywhere else, because this is all part of the United States. And so recruitment is really important, but that requires intentionality.
Right.
And that's what it goes back to.
So I'll add to that. I think that one of the important things too, so I teach at the college level, but it's something that I think can be passed down here too, is thinking about the curriculum. So like, what exactly are you teaching? What books are you reading? Whose knowledge are you privileging? Like those kinds of things. So books, I am an avid reader. I've been reading for forever. It's really important. And luckily I was able to have books where I have characters that look like me. But it can be difficult to find that. And like I say, I mean, just walking in the library was incredible, because you all did a really good job of displaying books with very diverse characters. But if you all didn't do that and you had like the trucks, or you had characters that weren't diverse, imagine what that would feel like for someone of color, or not even just for someone of color, for the children in general, because if you see those same things over and over again, that does stick with you, that this is what is dominating. And so just to walk in here and see that, and I don't know what it looks like outside of this library, but I think the libraries are really powerful, and just to see that in here, I hope that would be reflected within the other areas of the school. So I think that definitely thinking about what kind of curriculum you all are having, include knowledge and privileging, different kinds of activities, different things to just make sure that everyone is stimulated, that everyone is learning the way that is best for them. I think that those kind of things are really important, and representation impacts all of those things.
Yeah, thank you. Those are amazing answers. I would add too, I think the teaching force is predominantly white female.
Even in college?
Even in college as well. So, well, white, I don't look at that much. Let me not go there. I do more K through 12. Maybe
No,
like more than
K through 12.
K through 12 is white female, and I think that's a fact that we live with. And I don't think we'll be able to change that tomorrow. But I think, you know, we are still. What I want to say is, because you're white doesn't mean that you cannot be an ally, if you think about that. Because you're white does not mean that you should not take part in this. Or because you're white doesn't mean you cannot talk about race or help children understand race and racism and what that means. So I think what a school can do is, and what teachers have to do is understand themselves, how they've been racialized, how they have been gendered in this society, and what does that mean for them? And then also, how do they think about other groups, other populations that are different from them? Because those ideas and ideology that teacher brings into the classroom, he or she brings that into the classroom and thinks about a certain student in a certain way based on how society has taught you to think about those students. And the unfortunate thing about that is a lot of those have a detrimental impacts for these students. So we can't wait for the black teachers or the teachers of color to arrive to our schools in masses to be able to be multicultural and be more diverse. It's us, one, because this is our society. We all live here. We all have to participate in it. So if we all have to be willing to participate in it. And you and teachers, I think what schools can do as something to do. Austin is a great city that shares a large research-one institution that has a lot of scholars that do race education. I'm in the college of race, and I focus K through 12, and I have a lot of people that I lean to that are black, that are Afro-Latino, that are white teachers, that are white female teachers, that are Asian teachers, Asian scholars that think about these issues in real ways. Now they act like they're super busy, which they are, but maybe they're just reaching out to conduct workshops for teachers to think about where they have been, how they've been raised, how white women have been raised, and what do you bring into your classroom, and how are you treating your students? And even there's certain schools that are going to be 90% white. That's just the demographic of the area. And we can talk about how racially that happened historically, but the fact is 90% of the schools white, 90% of the teachers staff white. So we're just going to act like we don't live in a multicultural society, and one that you'll have to interact with people of color or people of difference. Teachers have to be versed in this. We're not comfortable talking about race. Like tonight, we're not comfortable talking about it. So for us to talk about racism, dismantling white supremacy, we gotta understand where we play in that and how we've been racialized. So I think what schools can do is help teachers understand how they've been racialized, how race operates in their lives, and how does that operation of race in their life influence what they do in the classroom, how they treat students that they work with. And schools have to be proactive to help teachers and administrators, same thing, understand where they are and how can we think about who we are and how we're bringing who we are into the classroom. And that's going to a little change, right? As we work structural, work out institutionalized things, but where do I stand?
And I'll just add one more thing, because I've seen this in my work with schools and with staff, this desire and genuine hunger to bring more and more people of color onto staff, onto admin, but that community wasn't ready. So the work and the labor that ends up on the lap of that person, because it's often one, right? Because that's all we can do, is overwhelming. Because there's the professional labor, and then there's the emotional labor that goes along with being the first black male teacher at this school. And everything that comes along with that falls on your lap. So the black kids want to come to you. The other teachers come to you like, oh, you know, could you take care of these kids? And so this extra stuff that, parentheses, you're not getting paid for, right? But like all this extra stuff now falls on you because your school didn't do its own work to welcome you, to support you. And so as this school thinks about recruitment and diversifying curriculum and doing all of this work, there, you know, as you're saying, there's some unpacking that teachers and administrators have to do in order to be able to do that effectively. You know, before we you know, are concerned, like in Massachusetts, about busing and integrating, right, like forced integration, before we think about doing something like that, teachers need to know what biases they're bringing into that space. Administrators need to be prepared to offer support to these teachers of color. So it's complicated.
I'll add to that. You asked about representation, and it's interesting because this whole week in my class we've been talking about the same things that we're talking about here. And I have a majority white class, and in terms of talking about representation, they're all like, "Well, this doesn't have anything to do with me. Right? You must be talking about like your students of color." I don't have to think about representation, and this room is majority white, and so I imagine that you might not necessarily have to think about these things with your kids, but you really do, because you showed the slide with the books and the characters. Those are important to your kids too. The things that they consume in media, that's important to them too. And even listening to Black podcasts, which I assume your kids probably would, because they're for adults. But even still, like whatever media they consume, whatever books they consume, whatever, those things are important to them too. They need to see diverse representation as well, because it impacts how they see the world. It does not do them any service to see themselves reflected in nothing else. Just like it wouldn't do me that same service as well. So it's important to think about that for your kids too. And I think that's something that like my college students struggle with. So that's something that you all can think about now with your kids. Hopefully they don't have to struggle with the same thing when they get to college.
Thank you.
Oh, I was just going to say, I really appreciate this, because I have tried to find books that are representative, that are good, that my son wants to read, and you find like the book about Jackie Robinson, you know, and it's like really
Harriet
dark
Tubman and Frederick Douglass.
right. I mean, it's hard to, or like Derek Jeter. Right. But you also want there just to be a book that's like fun, you know, that they want to read, and so thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that your point. So whatever, that's a whole nother workshop. But you know, publishers right now are you know. So there's this one particular young adult author, Jason Reynolds. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. Who wrote like A Long Way Down and a whole bunch of these other young adult novels, and his novels sell. And so he's part of this friend group, and one of his friends is Angie Thomas, who wrote The Hate You Give. And so when her book came out, you know, I mean, it's still one of the top bestsellers, New York Times bestseller. And so, you know, so all these authors have now kind of blossomed. And so publishers are receiving the message that people have been telling them for decades, that, you know, literature by folks of color is going to sell. right? And so there was always this, is it relatable? Because for some reason, we can all relate to Shakespeare, right? For some reason, but it's always dubious, and then they said, will we be able to relate to Ryan Reynolds writing a book about being a person, you know? And so since these books have sold, and they are some of the most popular ones, consistently getting checked out of libraries. Anyway, the point is that publishers are now like, okay, fine, who's the next hot one? You know, and so there's actually this big boom in literature right now, publishing both characters of color and authors of color. So now's the time, get them all, because who knows what's going to happen.
And the last thing I'll add to that, I think it's an amazing point when thinking about race and racism and understanding that racism, that we shouldn't think about race as just negative encounter, somebody calling me something bad, or race is only psychologically, like it, how somebody makes you feel. Race, that's why I say race and racism, to help us understand how race operates, right? And racism is a part of that. You know, discrimination is a part of that. And race, and we should think about race and curriculum as far as, one, how do we talk about race? How do we teach race? How do we teach race at the different levels of K through 12 education and K through 20 education really, or K through life education? How do we think about race? And also how race how do we think about race and its operation? Okay, so like this don't only think about racism as negative things that happen, but just the operation of that. And there is a lack of stories that deal with black characters that don't center acts of discrimination in their lives and don't give them the full capacity, like Harry Potter, to dream, to be in the dream and blow magic and do all these different things.
And you want both. I mean, you want to teach about acts of discrimination, but you also want there to be
imagine.
Happy kids, right?
To be like Harry Potter, like to be like flying on dragons and stuff. Be black flying on dragons, right? That's crazy. I would have saw that.
Yeah, no, just one thing. So you're finishing Black History Month. I have heard some black friends like brace yourself for Black History Month and all the things that come with the representation of black people, and even more when you are in a majority white environment. So sometimes it seems how much it is appreciation, how much it's appropriation. We have been talking so much about blackface now, you know, that with news and all. Would it be okay to maybe, because in certain way it's all about this, okay, representation and normalization, and then there's that fine point, that fine line between appreciation and appropriation, or when it's like that's not your place to represent. Would you like to talk about it?
Sorry, can I add to that? How important do you think it is to have the lived experience of a marginalized group of people in this country to be able to tell the stories and histories of that group of people?
I mean, that's always the goal. So that's like never not a thing. That's always a thing. So there's that piece. That's whenever that's an option, and that's where you want to privilege, right? Because those are words and voices that are always not privileged. They're always in the margins. And so how do we bring them from the margins into the center and center that during this month that's supposed to be celebratory? I don't know if you want to comment.
The only thing I have to say about Black History Month, I think Black History Month is amazing because oftentimes, it's the only time in a lot of our school settings where there is a talk about race. And then, because we only think race has to do with black people or people of color. That's how we think about race. So Black History Month has been a way for that to even have a spark of a conversation. Obviously, hopefully, talking today, we understand that issues of race and teaching diversity in schools shouldn't be limited to only a month, especially understanding, how privileged whiteness is when we look at the representation of characters, 70%. And I looked at the curriculum and the TEAC's curriculum, the majority of the history is centered around whiteness. So I think it's important to have that space there. One, because it's an entry. Two, because we need to now think about race as real experiences, not only in 1 month. Cultural appreciation versus appropriation. If you're considering doing blackface or considering having your students doing blackface, you look at the news.
Stop right there. Put it down.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, like
Thank
literally,
you.
if that's what you want to do at the school, you watch the news, you do it, right? But you know what's going to be what the repercussions are. But I say that to say, we have in this, a lot of times in the country when things like this happen, we want to just get rid of that person and say that they're evil, discriminatory, and we still even address the issue of why it's why it's bad, and why blackface might be indicative of real life issues that still happen in these spaces. But contemporarily speaking, consequentially speaking, if that's what you want to engage in your school, you will see the consequences. They'll be very negative. So just don't do it. But I think we have to think about what does that mean. And we know that it's a historical thing tied with Jim Crow minstrel shows and a certain depiction of black people. But we have to think, okay, that might have been a very racist act in the past. But does that racism and the impacts of that racism from 1905 still impact everyday and lived experience of all of us in our classroom spaces? And how do we address that without only thinking about during the Black History Show if we're going to do something to get ourselves in trouble?
So I'll add to that in terms of Black History Month, being here is making me think about my own elementary school. And I went to a very black elementary school, and when I say that, it was the majority of the staff members are black, but also like Black History Month was pretty much every month. It was amped up during February, but pretty much throughout the whole year, celebrations of all kinds of things dealing with blackness. So I think that probably some of the anxiety around Black History Month is the fact that there might be anxiety about how to deal with it, or how to fit it into 1 month, or even just because it's not part of the rest of the curriculum, that it feels forced to do it within 1 month and then go back to yeah. And so I think that if it's something that's implemented throughout the entire year, then it won't feel like a shock, or it won't feel like, oh my goodness, people have been doing it, because it's going to be something that is nonstop. So I think that thinking about that and thinking about how can we implement blackness into every part of our curriculum, and not just blackness, just diversity in general, and that is all kinds of diversity. How can we implement that in the best way possible into every facet of our school? Then it won't be as much of a shock, because I've experienced that as a child and it was phenomenal. So I know it can happen. So I think that that's something to consider. It's how to make it a normal thing instead of just we're doing it in February. March 1st is what, Friday? And then on Friday it's all right, we're done.
Done. Yeah.
And I'll speak a little bit to defining and clarifying right before wrapping up the difference between appreciation and appropriation. Just because I know that is often kind of unclear, and folks are concerned about how to not end up on the wrong side of that. And I think that one way to think about it is we all know what appreciation is, right? I love your sneakers, they look so cool, I appreciate them, I appreciate you. Versus appropriation, which would be cool, now give me your sneakers, right? That's a really big difference. And so that's kind of one way to think about it. Remember that, remember the sneakers example. And so, and maybe looking at examples is often the way to think about it. So, but whatever. So a clear definition, right? A cultural appropriation has to do with, in this country, I'm going to censor it here, white folks in particular taking ownership over the anything really that pertains to or belongs to a group that's been marginalized for their own benefit in some kind of way. And so some examples of that, one that always comes to mind is Kim Kardashian, and everything about her really, but particularly, the way that she loves to now all of a sudden not now, but at some point her hair, right? These boxer braids, and there was this cool new trend. And all of a sudden, this is her professional attire. She gets paid for this because she makes money off of anything. And whereas women of color with the same, with their hair texture, having these braids as a form of actually they're preserving their hair, okay? Or just using this style are deemed unprofessional cannot wear that to work, might even lose work. But she's celebrated for this very thing that other women are simultaneously being vilified for. That is cultural appropriation, because she takes ownership of that and she doesn't give any credit. And when probed about it, she says, "This is just a style. I don't know what people are talking about. I'm not so, you know, there's a real problem, and that's like a big microcosm, if you will. But like we can totally distill that into our everyday practices, even in the classroom, right? Teachers, for example, talking about windows and mirrors. This happens all the time at NCTE, and they never cite Rubin Sims Bishop. And so, you know, what do I do in moments like that? Like, excuse me, you see that metaphor you used? Isn't it so great? Yeah, do you know that an African-American woman actually talks about that? Don't take ownership over that. You need to credit. So crediting, giving people, you know, kind of acknowledging their labor and their work and their intellectual, I don't know, like product. Yeah. So that's one way to think about cultural appropriation and appreciation. Everybody loves appreciation. None of us like appropriation. I think with that, maybe I'll wrap us up. It's 8:20. Thank you for this space. Thank you for having us. I don't know if you want to say something to wrap up.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.